The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in surgical white. Elias Turner's hand trembled against the metal rail as another contraction seized the woman on the bed. 6 months ago, he was emptying trash cans. Now he stood in a delivery room watching Serafina Caldwell bring their child into the world, and the impossibility of it threatened to crack his chest open. The monitor beeped. The doctor called for one more push. Serafina's fingers crushed his with a strength that surprised him. Her blonde hair stuck to her forehead in dark streaks. The red dress was gone. The boardroom was gone. Everything that separated them had burned away until only this remained, two people who had survived the worst the world could offer, standing together at the edge of something new. The baby's cry split the air, sharp, indignant, alive. Elias felt his knees buckle. The doctor lifted a small, writhing form. Serafina reached for their son with shaking hands. The moment stretched, infinite and fragile, and Elias thought about the elevator shaft where this all began. The smoke, the jammed doors, the beeping monitor that sounded so much like the one beside them now. Let me tell you how we got here. 3 months earlier, at 4:30 in the morning, Elias Turner's alarm clock shattered the silence of a one-bedroom apartment in Tacoma. The sound was a cheap digital screech that made his daughter groan from the pull-out couch across the room. He slapped the button before the second beep and lay still in the darkness, sort of feeling the familiar ache in his lower back from the mattress that had lost its springs 2 years ago. The red numbers glowed. December 3rd, rent was due in 5 days. The checking account held $842. The gas bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter because knowing the number wouldn't make it smaller. He rolled to his feet. The cold hardwood shocked him awake. Across the room, Callie had burrowed deeper under her blankets, only her dark curls visible against the pillow. She was 7 years old and still slept clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her before the cancer turned vicious. The rabbit's left ear was nearly torn off from years of being dragged everywhere. Elias had sewn it back 3 times. The bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than 36. Gray threaded through his temples. Lines had carved themselves around his eyes. His shoulders were still broad from the years when he'd worked construction to pay for college, but there was a heaviness to him now that had nothing to do with muscle. He splashed water on his face and brushed his teeth with the automatic efficiency of someone who had streamlined every morning task to avoid waking his child. The apartment was a study in careful economies. The furniture came from Goodwill and estate sales. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of his wife Elena holding newborn Callie. They'd taken it in the hospital 7 years ago when the future still felt full of possibility. Elena's smile in that photo was the real thing, bright and unguarded. Elias had framed it after the funeral because Callie needed to remember what her mother looked like when she was happy. He moved to the kitchenette. The space was barely 8 feet across with laminate counters that had peeled at the edges and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. He filled the coffee maker with water and cheap grounds, then opened the cabinet to check their supplies. Half a box of cereal, peanut butter running low, bread for maybe 3 more days. He'd get paid Friday. $620 for 2 weeks of night shifts at Stratton Industries. After rent and utilities, there'd be enough left for groceries and maybe, if nothing broke, a small cushion against the next emergency. The coffee maker gurgled. While it worked, Elias pulled out his laptop, a battered machine from 2016 that took 3 minutes to wake up. He logged into his email, 2 new messages. One was spam, the other was from Seattle Children's Hospital, a reminder about Callie's annual checkup in January. He'd need to call about the copay. Their insurance through his job was the bare minimum, and even that took $140 from each paycheck. He closed the laptop and poured coffee into a travel mug. The apartment's single window showed the parking lot below streetlights reflecting off puddles from last night's rain. Beyond the chain-link fence, the city sprawled in the pre-dawn darkness. Seattle's skyline glowed in the distance, towers of glass and steel, where people made 6 figures and never thought about whether they could afford peanut butter. Elias had worked in one of those buildings once, before Elena got sick, before the medical bills turned their savings into ash, before he'd lost his job at the biomedical firm because he'd missed too many shifts sitting beside her hospital bed. He pushed the memory down. There was no point in rehashing what couldn't be changed. At 5:15, he wrote a note from Mrs. Alvarez next door. She'd come in at 6:30 to watch Callie before school. The arrangement cost him $50 a week paid in cash, and it was worth every penny. Mrs. Alvarez had raised 4 kids of her own and treated Callie like a granddaughter. He kissed Callie's forehead. She stirred, mumbled something about pancakes, and rolled over. Elias whispered that he loved her, then grabbed his jacket and left. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. The early morning air bit through his coat. He walked past the other apartment buildings in the complex, all identical structures with fading paint and patched roofs. A few lights glowed in windows where other people were starting their days. A man in a work uniform climbed into a pickup truck. A woman in scrubs walked toward the parking lot, her breath fogging in the cold. The bus arrived at 5:28. Elias climbed aboard and swiped his pass. The interior smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. He took a seat near the back and watched the city slide past. Gas stations, fast food chains, pawn shops with barred windows. The landscape shifted gradually as they moved closer to downtown. The buildings grew taller, the streets cleaner. By the time they reached the financial district, the world outside looked like a different planet. Stratton Industries headquarters rose 30 floors above the intersection of 5th and Union. The building was all glass and steel angles designed by some architect whose name Elias had forgotten. During the day, it reflected the sky like a mirror. At night, it glowed from within a monument to corporate power and ambition. Elias got off 2 blocks away and walked to the service entrance on the building's north side. The employee entrance for executives was on 5th Avenue with automatic doors and a marble lobby. The service entrance was a metal door beside the loading dock marked only by a faded sign that said authorized personnel. He swiped his badge. The reader beeped. The lock clicked open. Inside the service corridors were a different universe from the executive floors above. The walls were painted cinder block. The floors were scuffed concrete. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a frequency that made his teeth ache if he paid attention to it. The locker room was empty at this hour. Elias changed into his uniform navy blue pants and a matching shirt with Stratton Maintenance embroidered over the breast pocket. The fabric was clean but worn thin at the elbows. He'd been issued 2 shirts when he started 3 years ago and hadn't requested replacements because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. His supervisor's office was a cramped space near the loading dock. Gary Simmons was 58 and counting down to retirement. He had a gut that strained against his polo shirt and a mustache he'd been growing since the 80s. He handed Elias a clipboard with the night's assignments. Floors 12 through 18, empty the trash, vacuum the carpets, wipe down the conference room tables, check the bathrooms for supplies. The routine never varied. Elias took the clipboard and grabbed his maintenance cart from the supply room. The cart was a utilitarian steel frame on wheels loaded with trash bags, cleaning solution, and vacuum attachments. He'd pushed this same cart through these same hallways for 3 years, moving through the building like a ghost, while the people who worked above him never registered his existence. He took the service elevator to the 12th floor. The doors opened onto a darkened hallway. The executive offices here belonged to mid-level managers and department heads. During the day, assistants buzzed between cubicles. Conference rooms filled with people arguing over PowerPoint slides. But at night, the space belonged to him. He moved methodically, emptied the trash cans in the offices along the north wall, wiped the fingerprints from the glass doors, vacuumed the hallway in careful rows, overlapping each pass to avoid streaks. The work was mindless, which suited him. It gave his hands something to do while his mind drifted. He thought about Callie's Christmas list, currently taped to the refrigerator. She wanted a science kit she'd seen at Target and a new book series about dragons. The total came to $63. He'd been setting aside $10 from each paycheck since October. He had 45 saved. 3 more weeks and he'd have enough. By 7 o'clock, he'd finished the 12th floor and moved to the 13th. The maintenance closet here was larger with a utility sink and shelves stocked with industrial cleaning supplies. He refilled his spray bottles and checked his watch. Right on schedule. The building was waking up around him, and he heard the distant ding of elevators arriving. Voices echoed in the stairwells. The day shift was starting. Elias worked faster, wanting to finish the 14th floor before the executives started arriving. The 14th floor housed the finance department. Corner offices with views of Elliott Bay. A break room with an espresso machine that cost more than Elias's monthly rent. He'd once made the mistake of using it during his shift. Gary had chewed him out for 10 minutes about unauthorized use of executive amenities. He emptied the last trash can and moved toward the elevator bank. The executive elevators here were different from the service lift he used. They had mirrored walls and soft lighting. They played classical music. They required a key card to access floors above 20. Elias was about to head back to the service corridor when the lights flickered. It was brief, maybe 2 seconds. The fluorescence overhead dimmed, then surged bright again. His first thought was a breaker issue. The building's electrical system was aging. There had been problems before. He made a mental note to mention it to Gary and continued toward the service elevator. That's when he heard it, a muffled thump, metal groaning, then a high-pitched whine that made his engineering instincts scream. He stopped, listened. The sound came from the executive elevator bank. One of the cars had stopped between floors. Through the narrow gap where the doors met, he saw smoke curling upward. Elias dropped the clipboard. His body moved before his mind caught up. He sprinted to the elevator, pressing his ear against the cold metal. From inside, faint and panicked, a woman's voice called for help. His hands were already reaching for his keyring. After 3 years working maintenance, he knew every override code and emergency access point in the building. The elevator panel came off with a practiced twist. Behind it, the manual release lever gleamed in the emergency lighting. He pulled. The mechanism resisted. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled harder. Metal shrieked. The doors separated 6 inches. Smoke poured out, gritting chemical. The smell of burned wiring and overheated circuits. Elias grabbed the gap and forced the doors wider. His shoulders barely fit. Inside the elevator had stopped 18 inches below floor level. The car's interior was dim-lit only by emergency LEDs. A woman was slumped against the mirrored back wall. Even through the smoke, he recognized her. Serafina Caldwell, the CEO. Her photo was in the lobby, positioned beside the company's mission statement. She was younger than the other executives, 34, according to the bio beneath her picture. Brilliant, driven, the kind of person who made partner at consulting firms before 30 and ran Fortune 500 companies before 40. She wore a red dress that had probably cost more than Elias's car. Her blonde hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and there, visible in the gap between the elevator floor and the building's floor line, he saw what she'd been hiding. She was pregnant. The curve of her belly pressed against the fabric of her dress. On her wrist, a small medical device beeped erratically. Elias recognized it from Elena's pregnancy. A fetal heart rate monitor. The kind high-risk mothers wore when complications threatened. He squeezed through the gap. The smoke was thicker inside, coming from a circuit panel above the control buttons. Sparks flickered behind the plastic cover. The whole car reeked of melted insulation. Elias knelt beside Serafina. Her pulse was weak but steady, her breathing shallow. He spoke to her the way he'd spoken to Elena during the bad nights in the hospital, low and calm, projecting a certainty he didn't feel. "Stay with me. Help is coming. You're going to be fine." Her eyes fluttered. She tried to speak but couldn't get enough air. The monitor on her wrist beeped faster, then slower, then faster again. The irregular rhythm sent ice through Elias's chest. He'd watched enough medical equipment to know what that meant. The baby was in distress. He positioned her carefully, elevated her legs on his jacket, kept pressure on her hand to maintain consciousness. His other hand fumbled for his radio. The walkie-talkie crackled as he keyed the emergency channel. Medical emergency, executive elevator 3, between floors 13 and 14. Need paramedics now. The dispatcher's voice came back. Confirmation, fire team en route, ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes felt like forever. Elias kept talking to Serafina, told her his name, told her she was doing great, told her the cavalry was coming. Her fingers twitched against his palm. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused and glassy. The monitor beeped again. The pitch changed. Elias glanced at the display. The fetal heart rate was dropping. He made a decision. He shifted position, supporting Serafina's back with one arm while using his free hand to adjust the monitor's position on her wrist. Sometimes the sensors lost contact. Sometimes it was just bad placement. The beeping stabilized. The heart rate climbed back toward normal. Serafina's eyes found his. For a moment, through the smoke, in fear, in pain, something passed between them. Recognition. Gratitude. Trust. Elias held her gaze and kept talking, told her about Callie, about how scared he'd been when Elena went into labor early, about how the monitors had done the same thing and the nurses had kept saying everything was fine until suddenly it wasn't. He told her that fear was normal, that she was stronger than she thought. He didn't know if she heard him. Her eyes drifted closed again, but her breathing steadied. Her grip on his hand relaxed from panic to something closer to determination. The fire team arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Elias heard them before he saw them. Heavy boots pounding down the hallway. Radio chatter, the clang of equipment. They pried the doors fully open. 2 firefighters in full gear lowered themselves into the car. One checked Serafina's vitals, while the other examined the smoking circuit panel. A third firefighter positioned a backboard. Elias stepped back to give them room. His hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. Adrenaline burned through his system like poison. They lifted Serafina onto the stretcher with practiced efficiency. As they carried her toward the open doors, her hand shot out. Her fingers closed around Elias's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were open now, clear, locked onto his. She didn't speak, couldn't speak with the oxygen mask they'd placed over her face, but her grip said everything. "Thank you, I see you, I won't forget." Camera flashes erupted from somewhere in the growing crowd. Elias blinked against the light. He hadn't noticed the people gathering. Executives in suits, assistants with phones, security guards trying to establish a perimeter. Someone was recording. He saw the phone raised high, capturing the moment from multiple angles. The paramedics wheeled Serafina toward the main elevators. The crowd parted. Elias stood in the damaged car, surrounded by smoke and broken machinery, and watched her disappear. A security guard appeared at the door. Young guy, nervous energy. He asked Elias what happened. Elias explained, power surge, jammed elevator, CEO trapped inside. He'd heard her calling for help and used the emergency override. The guard took notes, asked for his employee number, told him to wait here. Someone from management would want to talk to him. Elias waited. Around him, the fire team shut down the damaged elevator and secured the circuit panel. An electrician arrived with a voltage meter, shaking his head at the burned components. The crowd dispersed gradually as people realized the show was over. Gary Simmons appeared 30 minutes later. His face was red, not from exertion, from anger. "What the hell were you thinking?" Elias blinked. He tried to explain again. Someone was in danger. He'd responded. "Basic emergency protocol." Gary cut him off. "You're not authorized to perform elevator rescues. You're not trained for confined space entry. You violated half a dozen safety regulations." The words felt wrong. Elias searched for the logic in them. Someone had been dying in that elevator. He'd saved her life. What safety regulation was more important than that Gary told him to go home? Said management would review the incident. Said he'd be contacted. Elias rode the bus back to Tacoma in a daze. The city slid past in reverse. Steel towers gave way to chain-link fences. The sun rose over the gray streets. Mrs. Alvarez was still at the apartment when he arrived. She took one look at his face and asked if he was okay. He told her he was fine, just tired. She left with a worried glance over her shoulder. Callie was eating cereal at the kitchen table. She looked up when he entered her spoon halfway to her mouth. "You're home early." He forced a smile. Took a few days off. She accepted this without question. Kids had a way of believing what they wanted to believe. She asked if they could go to the park later. He said yes. After she finished breakfast and started working on a puzzle in the living room, Elias sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. He thought about calling someone, but he had no family left. Elena's parents had moved to Arizona after the funeral. His friends from the biomedical firm had drifted away during the long months of her illness. He was alone with this, whatever this was. The call came 3 days later, Monday morning, 8:15. Elias was making Callie's lunch when his phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was female, professional, clipped. She identified herself as Beatrix Collins from Human Resources. She asked if he could come in for a meeting that afternoon. He said yes. She gave him a time. 2 o'clock, 14th floor. He hung up and stared at the half-made sandwich on the counter. His stomach twisted into knots. Callie asked what was wrong. He said nothing. Work stuff. He dropped her at school and spent the rest of the morning trying not to think about the meeting. He cleaned the apartment, paid the bills that couldn't wait, sat on the couch and watched the clock crawl toward 1:30. At 1:45, he put on his only dress shirt and took the bus downtown. The 14th floor of Stratton Industries looked different during business hours. The hallways buzzed with activity. People moved between offices with tablets and coffee cups. Conference rooms glowed with PowerPoint presentations. Elias felt like he'd stepped onto a different planet. Everyone here wore clothes that fit properly. Everyone spoke in the casual shorthand of people who belonged. He found the HR office at the end of the north corridor. The door was glass with frosted lettering. He knocked. A voice told him to enter. Beatrix Collins sat behind a desk made of glass and chrome. She was maybe 50 with short hair and a gray suit that probably cost a month of Elias's rent. Her expression was neutral in the way that HR people learned to be neutral, giving nothing away. Across from her, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, stood a man Elias recognized from company photos. Damon Croswell, Chief Financial Officer. Damon was in his mid-40s with blonde hair slicked back and a face like a knife. Sharp cheekbones, cold gray eyes. He wore a silver suit that caught the light when he moved. A diamond watch glinted on his wrist. He didn't introduce himself, just watched. Beatrix slid a document across the desk. 3 pages, legal language. Elias read slowly, his eyes catching on phrases that made his chest tight. Unauthorized entry into a restricted area. Violation of safety protocol, liability concerns. Effective immediately, your employment with Stratton Industries is terminated. He looked up. His mouth felt dry. Why? Beatrix repeated the language from the letter. Unauthorized access, safety violations. The company's legal team had determined that his actions, while well-intentioned, created unacceptable risk. Elias tried to process this. He'd saved the CEO's life. He'd prevented a woman and her unborn child from dying in a smoke-filled elevator. And they were firing him for it. He looked at Damon. The CFO's face was blank. But there was something in his eyes, amusement maybe. The look of a cat watching a mouse before the final pounce. Elias asked if Serafina knew about this, if the CEO had been consulted about the decision to fire the man who'd saved her life. Beatrix's expression didn't change. Personnel decisions were made by HR in consultation with executive leadership. Ms. Caldwell had been informed. The room felt smaller. Elias looked down at the termination letter, his name in cold print, the date, the signature line at the bottom. A cardboard box sat on the floor beside Beatrix's desk. Inside were his personal items from the locker room, his spare uniform, his thermos, the photo of Callie he kept taped inside his locker door. He stood, picked up the box. The weight of it was nothing. 3 years of work reduced to objects that fit in 18 inches of cardboard. He walked out without another word. Through the hallway where people pretended not to watch, past the conference rooms where meetings continued without pause, down the elevator to the marble lobby where security guards avoided his eyes. Outside, the December air bit his skin. He stood on the sidewalk holding the box and watched the city move around him. Cars honked. People hurried past with their phones pressed to their ears. The world continued indifferent to the fact that his had just collapsed. He thought about Callie, about the bills, about the rent due in 2 days. He thought about Christmas and the science kit he'd been saving for. He thought about Serafina Caldwell somewhere in this building and wondered if she knew what they'd done, if she cared. The bus ride home was a blur. He sat with the cardboard box on his lap and stared out the window. The city blurred past, glass towers, chain-link fences, the geography of inequality laid bare. At home, he hid the termination letter in a drawer. When Callie came home from school bright-eyed and full of stories about her day, he smiled and asked if she wanted to go to the park. They spent the afternoon on the swings. She pumped her legs and flew higher, her laughter cutting through the cold air. Elias pushed her and watched the sky fade from gray to darker gray and told himself he'd figure something out. That night after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He searched for the story online. It took 3 searches before he found it. Stratton Industries CEO hospitalized after elevator malfunction. The article was brief, 2 paragraphs. It mentioned a power surge, an equipment failure, a swift rescue by building personnel. It did not name him. It did not mention that he'd been fired. The comment section was more interesting. People speculated about what had happened. Some called the unnamed rescuer a hero. Others, fed by rumors from inside the company, suggested he'd acted recklessly, that he'd endangered himself and the CEO by entering a confined space without proper training. Elias closed the laptop. He sat in the dark apartment and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, someone's car alarm went off. A dog barked. Life continued in its messy, indifferent way. He thought about calling someone, arguing his case, fighting back. But who would listen? He was a janitor, replaceable, invisible. The company had made its decision. The narrative was set. He was the problem. They were the solution. Across the city in a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, Serafina Caldwell couldn't sleep. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand resting on her belly, and watched the lights of ferries moving across the dark water. She'd been released from the hospital that morning against medical advice. Dr. Louisa Penn had prescribed bed rest, 2 weeks minimum. Serafina had nodded and smiled and promised to follow instructions. She'd been back in the office by noon. Her assistant Jennifer had tried to block her, literally stood in front of her office door and argued that she needed to recover. Serafina had thanked her for the concern and gone inside anyway. Now, 16 hours later, she stood in her apartment and tried to remember the man's face, the janitor, the one who'd pulled her from the elevator. She remembered his voice, low and steady, calm in a way that had cut through her panic like a blade. She remembered his hands calloused and sure, adjusting the fetal monitor with the careful precision of someone who had done this before. She remembered the way he'd talked to her, told her about his daughter, his wife, the fear that came with bringing a child into the world. He'd seen her, really seen her. Not as the CEO or the board appointment or the woman who'd climbed too fast and made too many enemies. He'd seen her as a person in danger, and he'd acted without hesitation. And the company had fired him for it. She'd learned about the termination from an email. Beatrix Collins had sent it at 5 o'clock Monday afternoon. Subject line: resolution of elevator incident. The email was clinical. The janitor's unauthorized entry into a restricted space had created liability concerns. HR had consulted with legal. The decision had been made in the company's best interests. Serafina had read the email 3 times. Then she'd opened her laptop and pulled up the CCTV footage from the elevator bank. The building's security system was comprehensive. Cameras covered every floor, every hallway, every entrance. The footage from Thursday morning was stored on the central server. She watched herself step into the elevator at 8:46, watched the doors close, watched the numbers climb toward 28, where her office waited. Then at 8:47, the lights flickered. The elevator lurched. The camera inside the car went dark for 2 seconds. When it came back online, she was on the floor. Smoke curled around her. The emergency lights cast everything in red. Serafina watched herself try to stand and fail, watched herself reach for her phone and drop it, watched herself slump against the wall. One hand pressed to her belly, the monitor on her wrist beeping frantically. She watched 12 minutes pass. Then the doors separated. Smoke poured out. A man squeezed through the gap. The janitor, Elias Turner, according to the employee file she'd pulled later. She watched him kneel beside her, watched his mouth move, watched him adjust the monitor with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. She watched herself reach for him, watched her fingers close around his wrist as the paramedics arrived. She watched the camera flashes from the crowd, watched herself being carried away on a stretcher. And then she watched something that made her blood run cold. She rewound the footage. Started again from 8:45, 2 minutes before she'd entered the elevator. There, in the corner of the frame, Damon Crosswell stood near the elevator bank. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just standing there with his phone like anyone might while waiting for a car to arrive. But he didn't get on an elevator. Serafina watched the timestamp, 8:46. She entered the car. The doors closed. Damon remained in the hallway, his eyes on his phone. 8:47. The lights flickered. Damon looked up, not surprised, not alarmed. He checked his watch, then he walked away. Serafina paused the footage. Damon's face filled the screen. That blank expression, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth that might have been satisfaction. She reached for her phone. started to dial HR, started to demand an explanation. Then she stopped. If Daman had known about the malfunction before it happened, that meant something worse than negligence. That meant intent. That meant he'd been standing outside the elevator when he knew the power surge was coming. And if he'd done that, if he deliberately endangered her, then confronting him now would only drive him underground. She needed evidence, real evidence, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Serafina closed her laptop. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the glass window and watched the city lights blur. Somewhere out there, Elias Turner was trying to figure out how to explain to his daughter that he'd lost his job. Somewhere out there, Damon Crosswell was sleeping soundly, confident that he'd contained the situation. And here in her penthouse, Serafina Caldwell made a decision. She was going to find out what really happened. She was going to uncover who had sabotaged that elevator and why. And she was going to make sure Elias Turner got the justice he deserved. But first, she needed to find him. The next morning, she called her assistant. Jennifer appeared in her office at 8:15 with a tablet and a concerned expression. Serafina asked for the employee file on Elias Turner. Everything, address, phone number, employment history. Jennifer hesitated, asked if this was about the elevator incident. Serafina said yes. Jennifer pulled up the file. Read the address aloud. An apartment complex in Tacoma. Building C Unit 212. Serafina wrote it down, told Jennifer to clear her schedule for the afternoon. Jennifer started to protest. The board meeting, the investor calls, the merger audit. Serafina cut her off. Reschedule everything. This was more important. After Jennifer left, Serafina sat at her desk and stared at the address. She'd never been to Tacoma, never had a reason to go to the neighborhoods where people like Elias Turner lived. She thought about the distance between his world and hers, the geography of class and power, the invisible walls that kept people separated. She thought about the man who'd crossed those walls to save her life and been punished for it. At 4 o'clock, she left the office through the parking garage. Her driver, Marcus, opened the door of the black sedan and asked where they were going. She gave him the address. He entered it into the GPS without comment. That was why she'd kept Marcus for 5 years. He knew when not to ask questions. They drove south through the city. The buildings changed. Glass towers gave way to strip malls and industrial parks. The roads roughened. Potholes multiplied. By the time they reached Tacoma, the sky had darkened to that particular gray that meant rain was coming. The apartment complex was worse than she'd imagined. Low buildings with peeling paint, rusted railings, a chain-link fence around a patch of brown grass where children's toys lay scattered. The parking lot was potholed asphalt with faded lines. Marcus pulled up to the curb, kept the engine running. Serafina stepped out. She'd changed into jeans and a loose sweater before leaving the office. Her blonde hair was tucked under a dark hood. She looked as unremarkable as she could manage. The rain started as she walked toward Building C. Light drops that promised to get heavier. Unit 212 was on the second floor. She climbed the concrete stairs, each step echoing in the quiet evening. At the top, she paused. A little girl sat on the landing, bent over a broken toy car. She had dark curls and serious eyes. She looked maybe 7 years old. Serafina approached carefully, asked if Elias Turner lived here. The girl looked up, nodded, called over her shoulder toward the open door. "Dad, someone's here for you." Footsteps approached. Then Elias appeared in the doorway, wary and confused. He recognized her immediately. His eyes widened. He glanced past her toward the parking lot, probably spotting the sedan with its tinted windows and expensive gleam. Serafina introduced herself, though she didn't need to. Said she wanted to thank him. Elias stepped fully into the doorway. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that filled a space without trying. He asked if she was okay, if the baby was okay. She said yes, thanks to him. She pulled an envelope from her jacket. Inside was $3,000 in cash, enough to cover several months of rent based on what she'd guessed apartments like this cost. She tried to hand it to him, said it was the least she could do. Elias didn't take it. His expression hardened. "I don't want money. Just tell the truth." The words hit her like a slap. Simple, direct, devastating. Serafina started to respond, started to explain that the situation was complicated, that she was working on it, that she needed time. But before she could speak, headlights flared across the parking lot. A tinted SUV pulled up across the street. Too new. Too expensive for this neighborhood. The driver's window lowered 6 inches. A camera lens appeared. Flash! Elias reacted instantly. He stepped in front of Serafina, his body blocking hers from the camera's view. The same instinct that had made him squeeze into a smoke-filled elevator. The same protective impulse that probably defined how he moved through the world with his daughter. The SUV's window rolled up. The vehicle pulled away slowly, deliberately, making sure they knew they'd been seen. Serafina's blood turned to ice. Someone was watching. Someone knew she was here. And that meant someone didn't want her talking to Elias Turner. She looked at Elias. His jaw was tight. His hands had curled into fists. Behind them, the little girl asked what was happening. Her voice was small, scared. Elias turned, told her it was nothing, just someone lost. But his eyes, when they met Serafina's, told a different story. This wasn't over. Whatever had happened in that elevator, whatever corporate machinery had decided to crush him, it was bigger than either of them had realized. Serafina lowered her voice, asked if they could meet tomorrow, somewhere private. Elias hesitated, glanced back at his daughter, then he nodded. She gave him her personal number, told him to text when he was available, said she owed him more than thanks, said she needed his help. Elias looked at her for a long moment, then he said, okay. Serafina walked back to the sedan. Marcus opened the door. She climbed inside and watched through the tinted window as Elias and his daughter went back into their apartment. On the drive back to Seattle, she called Constance Lee, her legal counsel. The call went to voicemail. She left a message. I need to see you first thing tomorrow. It's urgent. It's about the elevator. Then she pulled out her laptop and opened the CCTV footage again. Watched Damon check his watch. Watched him walk away with that slight smile. She rewound further, started at 8:30, watched Damon enter the frame from the north quarter, watched him stand near the elevator bank, watched him pull out his phone and tap the screen. What was he looking at? Who was he texting? She needed access to his phone records, his email, his calendar. She needed a reason to dig into his activities without tipping him off. And she needed Elias Turner's help to prove what she was starting to suspect. That the elevator malfunction hadn't been an accident, that someone had wanted her trapped in that car, that someone had been willing to let her and her child die to achieve whatever goal justified the risk. The question was why. What did Damon gain from her death? The CEO position. He'd been passed over once already. The board wouldn't give it to him just because she was gone, unless there was something else, something she didn't see yet. Serafina stared out at the city lights. Her hand rested on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, a reminder that she was carrying a life that depended on her making the right choices. She thought about Elias Turner, about the way he'd positioned her in that elevator, the way he'd kept her conscious, the way he'd adjusted the monitor with hands that knew exactly what to do. She thought about his daughter's voice calling for him, the broken bay, the faded uniform. She thought about the envelope of cash still in her jacket pocket, the money he'd refused because he didn't want charity. He wanted truth. Truth, that was what this came down to. Finding it, speaking it, forcing the world to acknowledge it even when powerful people wanted it buried. Serafina made another decision. Tomorrow she would meet with Elias. She would show him the CCTV footage. She would ask him to help her understand what had failed in that elevator and why. And then together they would start pulling the thread that would unravel everything. She didn't know yet that the thread would lead to a billion-dollar conspiracy. She didn't know that Elias's genetic material had been stolen and used without his knowledge. She didn't know that the child she carried was biologically his. All of that would come later. For now, she only knew that something was wrong, that someone powerful wanted her silenced, that the man who'd saved her life had been destroyed for doing the right thing, and that she would not let that stand. The sedan pulled up to her building. Marcus opened the door. She stepped out into the rain now falling steadily and looked up at the 30 floors of glass and steel rising above her. Somewhere in there on the executive levels, where she'd spent the last 2 years of her life, someone was planning their next move. She needed to plan hers first. Word count 7912. Inside her penthouse, Serafina changed into comfortable clothes and made tea she wouldn't drink. The space around her was all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Furniture that had never been sat on. Art that had never been looked at. A kitchen where food was delivered and eaten over the sink. It was a monument to her priorities. Work first. Everything else negotiable. She'd bought the place after the promotion. Told herself she deserved it. Told herself the view was worth the mortgage that ate a quarter of her salary. Now standing alone in all that carefully curated emptiness, she wondered what she'd been trying to prove. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Green Lake Park, North End by the tennis courts. She saved the contact, Elias Turner. Then she opened her laptop and started digging. Stratton Industries maintenance records were stored on a central server accessible to executives. She pulled up the logs from the week before the elevator malfunction. 300 pages of routine inspections, work orders, and compliance certifications. She scrolled through them looking for anything related to the executive elevators. There, page 147, a work order dated November 28th, routine maintenance bypass authorization, signed by Damon Crosswell. The technical language was dense, designed to be incomprehensible to anyone without engineering training. But one phrase stood out. EB14 sensor override approved for merger audit compliance. EB14. She didn't know what that meant, but she photographed the page with her phone and made a note to ask Elias. She kept digging, found more work orders, more bypass authorizations, all signed by Damon, all dated in the 2 weeks before the malfunction. A pattern emerged: small safety features disabled, routine inspections delayed, corners cut in the name of efficiency. On its own, each authorization seemed reasonable. Budget constraints, timeline pressure. The merger audit required a clean building inspection, and these small delays wouldn't matter. Except they had mattered. They'd added up to a death trap. Serafina printed the relevant pages, 40 sheets documenting a trail of negligence. Not proof of intent, not yet, but enough to start asking questions. She worked until 3 in the morning. By the time she fell into bed, her mind was spinning with timelines and technical specifications and the cold mathematics of corporate liability. She dreamed of smoke and beeping monitors, of Elias's voice cutting through the darkness, of her baby's heartbeat faltering and recovering and faltering again. She woke at 6 with her heart pounding. The next morning was gray and cold. Serafina dressed in running clothes she almost never wore. Baseball cap, sunglasses, the uniform of anonymity. Marcus drove her to Green Lake. She told him to wait in the parking lot. This meeting needed to stay quiet. The park was busy for a Tuesday morning. Joggers circled the lake, dog walkers clustered near the water. Parents pushed strollers along the path. Serafina found the tennis courts at the north end. Elias was already there sitting on a bench with a coffee cup. He wore jeans and a flannel jacket. He looked tired. She sat beside him. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "Why are we here?" Serafina pulled out her phone, showed him the CCTV footage of Damon checking his watch. Elias watched without expression. Then he asked to see it again. She played it 3 times. On the third viewing, Elias pointed to the timestamp. 8:47. That's when the power surge hit. Serafina nodded. He was standing there before it happened, and he didn't look surprised when it did. Elias studied the frozen frame, Damon's face, the slight smile. "You think he knew?" Serafina met his eyes. "I think he caused it." The words hung between them, an accusation neither could prove, a conspiracy that sounded insane when spoken aloud. But Elias didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. Instead, he asked if she had access to the maintenance records. She showed him the printed pages, the work orders, the bypass authorizations. Elias read through them methodically. His finger traced the technical language. When he reached the EB14 sensor override, he stopped. "That's the failsafe. It monitors power surges and prevents the doors from jamming." Serafina leaned closer. "What happens if it's disabled?" Elias looked at her. "The elevator becomes a trap. Any surge strong enough to trip the circuit breaker will jam the doors and kill the emergency lighting. Exactly what happened to you." The pieces clicked into place. Damon had authorized the bypass. The surge had occurred on schedule. The elevator had failed exactly as it would if someone had engineered the malfunction. Serafina's hands trembled. She pressed them together to stop the shaking. Why would he do this? What does he gain? Elias shook his head. I don't know, but someone needs to ask him. Serafina thought about confronting Damon, walking into his office with the printouts and demanding answers. But that would only drive him underground, force him to destroy evidence, manufacture a defense. She needed more. She needed proof of intent. She needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done, and she needed help. She looked at Elias, this man who'd saved her life and lost his job, this stranger who owed her nothing. I want to hire you as a safety consultant, bring you back into the building with access to files and systems. Elias raised an eyebrow. After they fired me? Exactly. A public reinstatement sends a message that I trust you, that I value your expertise, that I'm not afraid of what people will say, and it gives you cover to investigate. Serafina nodded. I can't do this alone. I don't have your technical knowledge. I don't know what to look for. Elias was quiet. He stared across the lake at the joggers and dog walkers, people living normal lives, people who didn't have to decide whether to take on a billion-dollar corporation. Then he spoke. My daughter, if this goes bad, if they come after me again, I need to know she'll be protected. Serafina understood. She pulled out a business card, wrote a number on the back. This is my personal attorney, Constance Lee. If anything happens, call her. I'll make sure she has instructions to help you and your daughter. Elias took the card, studied it. Then he said, okay. They shook hands. The alliance was formed. Serafina left the park and went straight to the office. By 10 a.m., she drafted a press release. Stratton Industries is pleased to announce the appointment of Elias Turner as safety consultant for building operations. Turner's expertise in emergency response and building systems proved invaluable during a recent equipment malfunction. We look forward to his insights as we strengthen our safety protocols. She sent it to PR. They pushed back, called it a bad optic, asked if she was sure. She said yes. Run it. By noon, the release was live. By 2 p.m., Damon had requested a meeting. He appeared in her office at 3, closed the door behind him. His silver suit was immaculate. His diamond watch caught the light. He didn't sit, just stood in front of her desk with his arms crossed. What are you doing? Serafina kept her voice level. Hiring someone who saved my life. Seems reasonable. Damon's jaw tightened. You're creating a distraction. The merger audit is in 2 weeks. Investors are nervous. This is not the time for sentiment. Serafina smiled, cold, sharp. I'll keep that in mind. Damon stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation. Threat. Then he turned and left. Serafina waited until the door closed. Then she opened her laptop and started a new document. A timeline of every interaction with Damon since the elevator malfunction. Every email, every meeting, every veiled threat. She was building a case, piece by piece, thread by thread, and she had just put Damon on notice that she was not afraid. Elias's first day as safety consultant started at 8 a.m. Wednesday. He arrived through the main entrance this time. No service door, no hidden quarters. The security guard checked his new ID badge and waved him through. The marble lobby felt different from this side. Brighter, more open. Jennifer met him at the elevators. She was nervous, kept glancing around as if expecting someone to challenge his presence. She led him to an office on the 20th floor, small but functional. A desk, a computer, a window that looked out over the city. Your workspace. Ms. Caldwell asked me to make sure you have everything you need. Elias set down his bag. Inside were the maintenance records Serafina had given him and a laptop he'd borrowed from Ronnie. He asked Jennifer for access to the building's digital maintenance system. She hesitated. That requires executive clearance. I'm consulting on safety protocols. I need to see the full maintenance history. Jennifer made a call. 5 minutes later, the access was granted. Elias logged in. The system was more comprehensive than he'd expected. Every work order filed in the past 5 years, every inspection report, every compliance certification. He started with the executive elevators, pulled up the maintenance history for car 3, the one that had malfunctioned. The data painted a picture. The EB14 sensor had been disabled on November 28th, 3 days before the malfunction. The authorization came from Damon's office. But there was more. Elias traced the work order through the approval chain. It had been flagged by the building engineer, marked as non-standard, requiring executive review. Damon had overridden the flag, pushed it through anyway. Elias printed the documentation. Then he dug deeper. The building's electrical system was controlled by a central management program. He accessed the logs from December 3rd, the day of the malfunction. At 8:47 a.m., a power surge had originated in the substation beneath the north wing. The surge had traveled through the primary distribution panel and overloaded the circuit serving elevator 3. The EB14 sensor, if functional, would have detected the surge and isolated the elevator's control system. Without it, the surge had fried the emergency brakes and jammed the doors. Elias studied the electrical diagram. The surge was too precise, too localized. Natural power fluctuations affected multiple systems. This had targeted a single elevator. He pulled up the access logs for the substation. The space was restricted, required a key card and a 6-digit code. On December 2nd, the day before the malfunction, someone had entered the substation at 10 p.m. The access log showed the key card number, but not the name. Elias cross-referenced the number against the employee database. The card belonged to a maintenance supervisor named Gerald Voss, but Voss had been on vacation that week. His time card showed him clocking out on December 1st and not returning until December 8th. Someone had used Voss's card without authorization. Elias made note of the discrepancy. Then he pulled up the security footage from the substation entrance. The camera covered the doorway, but not the interior. At 10 p.m. on December 2nd, a figure approached. Male, average height, wearing a maintenance uniform and a baseball cap pulled low. The figure swiped the card, entered the code, disappeared inside. 17 minutes later, he emerged. Same cap, same uniform, face still hidden. Elias took screenshots, enhanced the images as much as the software allowed. The uniform was wrong. Maintenance crews wore navy blue. This uniform was charcoal gray, the kind worn by contracted electricians. He checked the contractor logs. No electrical work had been scheduled for that night. The pieces were coming together. Someone had accessed the substation with a stolen key card. Someone had tampered with the electrical system. Someone had created the conditions for a targeted malfunction. And that someone knew exactly when Serafina would be entering elevator 3. Elias sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking. This wasn't negligence. This was attempted murder. He called Serafina. She answered on the first ring. We need to talk, not on the phone. Meet me in conference room 2014 in 10 minutes. When she arrived, Elias spread the printouts across the table, showed her the work orders, the access logs, the security footage. Serafina studied each page in silence. Her face went pale. When he finished, she looked up. We need to bring this to the board. Elias shook his head. Not yet. This implicates Damon, but doesn't prove he gave the order. The person who entered the substation could claim they were following instructions. Damon's lawyers will argue he's being framed. We need more. Serafina pressed her palms against the table. What more is there? He authorized the bypass. Someone used a stolen card to sabotage the system. The elevator failed exactly as predicted. Elias pointed to the timeline. We need to prove Damon knew I would be entering that elevator. We need his communications, his emails, his phone records. Serafina's expression hardened. Those are protected by executive privilege. I can't access them without board approval. And if I go to the board, Damon will know we're investigating. Then we find another way. They worked through the afternoon, building a strategy, identifying gaps in the evidence. Constance Lee joined them at 4 p.m. She listened to their presentation without interruption. When they finished, she made notes in silence for 5 minutes. Then she spoke. You're accusing the CFO of attempted murder. The evidence is compelling but circumstantial. Any competent defense attorney will tear this apart. We need someone to flip, someone involved in the conspiracy who's willing to testify. Elias thought about the figure in the gray uniform, the contractor who'd entered the substation. I can find him. If he's a regular contractor, he'll be in the vendor database. Constance nodded. Do it. Find him before Damon does. Elias spent the next 3 hours in the database. Stratton Industries contracted with 17 electrical firms. He cross-referenced their employee rosters against the security footage timestamps. At 7 p.m., he found a match. Marcus Del Rey, electrician with Cascade Power Solutions, 5 years experience. Clean record. Elias pulled Del Rey's employee file, home address in Renton. Phone number, emergency contact. He called Serafina. I found him. Marcus Del Rey, works for Cascade Power Solutions. Can you get me a meeting? Serafina made the call. 20 minutes later, she had an answer. Del Rey will see you tomorrow, 10 a.m., a coffee shop in Renton. He sounded nervous. Elias wrote down the address. I'll talk to him, see what he knows. Be careful. If Daman finds out you're making contact, this gets dangerous. Elias thought about the SUV outside his apartment, the camera flash, the message that someone was watching. It already is dangerous. That night, Elias sat with Callie at the kitchen table. She was working on homework. Math problems about fractions and decimals. He watched her concentrate. Her tongue stuck out slightly, her pencil moving in careful strokes. She looked up. Is everything okay, Dad? He smiled. Yeah, just work stuff. She accepted this and went back to her homework. Elias thought about what he was walking into. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Stratton Industries. People with resources and connections. People who'd already proven they were willing to kill. And he thought about what would happen to Callie if something went wrong. He pulled out his phone, sent a text to Constance Lee. If anything happens to me, make sure my daughter is taken care of. I'll send you Mrs. Alvarez's contact information. She'll know what to do. The response came immediately. Nothing will happen to you, but I have your instructions. Elias put the phone away, helped Callie finish her math problems, made dinner, read her a story before bed. When she was asleep, he sat in the dark apartment and thought about Elena, about the promises he'd made at her funeral, to protect their daughter, to give her a good life. He was breaking those promises by diving into this investigation, putting himself at risk, choosing justice over safety. But he thought about Serafina trapped in that elevator, about the baby's heartbeat faltering, about the fact that someone had tried to kill them and would probably try again. He thought about the truth and what it cost to speak it, and he knew he couldn't walk away. The coffee shop in Renton was called the Daily Grind, generic name, generic interior, the kind of place that served burnt coffee and stale pastries. Elias arrived at 9:50. Marcus Del Rey was already there, sitting in the back corner, baseball cap pulled low, hands wrapped around a paper cup. Elias bought a coffee and joined him. Del Rey was maybe 30, thin, nervous energy. His eyes kept darting to the door. Elias introduced himself, safety consultant for Stratton Industries. Looking into the elevator malfunction, Del Rey's jaw tightened. I don't know anything about that. Elias pulled out his phone, showed him the security footage from the substation, the figure in the gray uniform. That's you, December 2nd, 10 p.m. You entered the substation with Gerald Voss's key card and tampered with the electrical system. Del Rey's face went white. I didn't tamper with anything. I was just doing a job. Elias leaned forward. What job? Who hired you? Del Rey looked away. I can't tell you that. The person who hired you tried to kill 2 people. One of them was pregnant. If you stay silent, you're an accomplice to attempted murder. Del Rey's hand shook. Coffee slopped over the rim of his cup. I didn't know anyone would get hurt. I swear. I thought it was just, I don't know, corporate stuff. They told me it was a controlled test. Who told you that Del Rey met his eyes? A guy called me, didn't give his name, offered $5,000 to install a voltage regulator in the substation. Said it was for an audit, said everything was approved. Did you keep the number? Del Rey nodded, pulled out his phone, showed Elias the call log. Elias photographed the screen. The number was a Seattle area code, probably a burner phone, but it was something. What exactly did you install? Del Rey swallowed hard. A remote-activated surge generator. Small, attaches to the primary distribution panel. Someone sends a signal, it creates a power spike. Can it be traced? Not easily. The device burns out after one use, destroys the evidence. Elias felt cold. This was premeditation. Someone had planned the malfunction down to the smallest detail. Someone had wanted it to look like an accident. I need you to testify. Tell the police what you just told me. Del Rey shook his head violently. No way. These people are serious. The guy who called me made it very clear what would happen if I talked. What would happen, I'd disappear, along with anyone I cared about. Elias studied him, saw the genuine terror in his eyes. If you don't testify, they'll do it again. Next time someone might die. Delray stood abruptly. I can't help you. I'm sorry. He walked out. Elias didn't follow. He sat alone in the coffee shop and stared at the photo of the phone number. One lead, not enough to build a case, but enough to keep pulling the thread. He called Constance Lee, told her about the meeting, about the surge generator, about Delray's refusal to testify. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then we go after the phone records, find out who called Delray, trace it back to Damon. Can you get a warrant? Not without more evidence. But there are other ways. She didn't elaborate. Elias didn't ask. Back at Stratton Industries, Serafina was in a board meeting. Quarterly reports, merger updates, the usual choreography of corporate performance. Damon sat across from her, perfectly composed, diamond watch glinting. He presented his financial projections, revenue growth, cost optimization. The merger would be complete in 3 weeks if everything stayed on schedule. The board asked questions. Damon answered with smooth confidence. Serafina watched him and thought about the surge generator, about the man in the gray uniform, about the $5,000 paid to ensure she'd be trapped in that elevator. After the meeting, she returned to her office. Jennifer was waiting with a stack of messages. One stood out. From Dr. Louisa Penn. Urgent. Please call. Serafina dialed. The doctor answered immediately. I need you to come in. Today, if possible. There's something we need to discuss about your pregnancy. Serafina's chest tightened. Is the baby okay? The baby is fine, but there's an issue with the donor records. Something that doesn't match. What kind of issue? Dr. Penn hesitated. I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here at 4? Serafina checked her calendar. Said yes. She spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings, her mind only half present, the other half spinning through worst-case scenarios. Genetic abnormalities, donor fraud, medical complications. By the time she arrived at Dr. Penn's office, she'd worked herself into a state of controlled panic. The doctor's office was in a medical complex near Swedish Hospital. Clean, professional, the walls decorated with photos of smiling babies. Dr. Penn was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She had delivered hundreds of babies and maintained the calm competence of someone who'd seen everything. She ushered Serafina into an exam room. Closed the door. I reviewed your genetic screening results. Standard procedure for IVF pregnancies. We compare the baby's markers against the donor records to confirm paternity and screen for genetic conditions. Serafina nodded. This was routine. The problem is the markers don't match the donor you selected. Clinton Marlowe was listed as the biological father, but the genetic profile is different. Serafina's mind went blank. That's impossible. I saw the donor selection. I signed the paperwork. Dr. Penn pulled up a file on her computer, showed Serafina the genetic comparison. According to this, the biological father is someone named Elias Turner. The room tilted. Serafina gripped the armrest of her chair. Elias Turner, the janitor, the man who'd saved her life. The man sitting in an office 20 floors below hers, right now helping her investigate a conspiracy. How is that possible? Dupin's expression was grave. The IVF lab is partnered with Stratton's Medical Research Division. 3 years ago, they conducted a biomedical tissue study. Participants donated genetic samples for regeneration research. Those samples were supposed to be destroyed after the study concluded, but someone kept them. Someone mislabeled them. And when you underwent IVF, they used one of those old samples instead of the donor you'd selected. Serafina couldn't breathe. The implications crashed over her in waves. Does Elias know? Not unless you've told him. His participation in the study was confidential. He probably has no idea his samples were retained. This is illegal. Dr. Penn nodded. It's more than illegal. It's a massive breach of medical ethics. If this goes public, it will destroy the lab. Possibly the entire medical division. Serafina thought about the merger, about Stratton's Medical Research Division, about the billion-dollar contracts tied to that division's reputation. She thought about Damon, about the elevator, about the conspiracy, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Damon hadn't tried to kill her because of the CEO position. He tried to kill her because of the baby. Because if anyone discovered that the IVF lab had used stolen genetic material, the entire medical division would collapse. The merger would fail. Billions of dollars would evaporate. And Damon, as CFO, had known about the retained samples, had probably authorized their storage, had been complicit in the fraud from the beginning. Serafina stood. Her legs felt weak. I need the full lab records. Everything related to the donor study and the IVF procedures. Dr. Penn hesitated. Those records are protected. I'd need a warrant or consent from the lab director. Then get consent, or I'll get the warrant myself. This is going to blow up Serafina. When this gets out, the legal fallout will be catastrophic. Serafina met her eyes. People tried to kill me to keep this quiet. I don't care about the fallout. She left the office in a daze, drove back to Stratton Industries on autopilot. In her office, she closed the door, locked it, sat at her desk, and tried to process what she'd learned. The baby she was carrying was Elias Turner's biological child, not by choice, not by consent, by medical fraud and corporate negligence. And Elias had no idea. She thought about telling him, about walking down to his office and explaining that their lives were now bound together in the most intimate way possible. But first, they had to survive the people trying to kill them. She called Constance Lee, told her about the genetic tests, about the retained samples, about the billion-dollar conspiracy. Constance listened in silence. When Serafina finished, the attorney let out a low whistle. This changes everything. We're not just looking at attempted murder. We're looking at medical fraud, violation of informed consent, illegal human experimentation. The list goes on. Can we prove it? If Dr. Penn provides the records, yes. But we need to move fast. Once Damon realizes we know about the samples, he'll destroy everything. How do we stop him? Constance thought for a moment. We get the lab servers before he can wipe them. Federal warrant. Executed immediately. No warning. Can you get that warrant? I know a federal prosecutor who specializes in bioethics violations. Give me 2 hours. Serafina hung up, looked at the clock. 6 p.m. Somewhere in this building, Damon was working late, planning his next move, confident that he'd contain the threat. He had no idea that the walls were closing in, and he had no idea that the baby he tried to kill was the very evidence that would destroy him. Serafina opened her laptop, started drafting an email to the board, a careful explanation of what she discovered, what she suspected, what she intended to do about it. She didn't send it yet, not until Constance had the warrant in hand, not until the servers were secured, but soon, very soon. The truth would come out, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Elias was leaving the office when his phone rang. Serafina's name on the screen. We need to meet. Tonight, my place. There's something you need to know. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way people sounded when they were barely holding it together. He told her he'd be there in an hour, drove to Mrs. Alvarez's apartment, asked if Callie could stay the night. Mrs. Alvarez took one look at his face and said yes. He kissed Callie goodbye, promised he'd be back in the morning. Drove to Serafina's building through rain that had turned heavy. The doorman recognized him from the press coverage, waved him through without question. The elevator to the penthouse was smooth and silent, nothing like the service lift at Stratton Industries. Serafina opened the door before he could knock. She looked exhausted. Her hair was down, no makeup, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater. Come in. The apartment was exactly what he'd expected. Expensive, impersonal, the kind of space that said its owner worked too much to care about home. She led him to the living room, large windows overlooking the bay, city lights reflecting on dark water. She sat on the couch, gestured for him to join her. Then she told him everything, about the donor records, about the genetic test, about the baby. Elias listened without moving. His face went blank, shock shutting down his ability to react. When she finished, he stood, walked to the window, stared out at the city. Serafina waited, gave him time to process. Finally, he spoke. You're sure the tests are definitive? Yes. He turned to face her. How long have you known? Since this afternoon. I found out from my doctor and came straight here. Does anyone else know? Just Dr. Penn and Constance Lee. I haven't told anyone at the company. Elias ran his hand through his hair. the weight of it settling onto his shoulders. This is why Damon tried to kill you, to bury the evidence of the medical fraud. Serafina nodded. The merger depends on Stratton's medical division having a clean reputation. If it comes out that they've been using stolen genetic material, the whole thing collapses, and he's willing to commit murder to prevent that. Elias sat back down, put his head in his hands. I donated those samples for research. They told me it was for tissue regeneration studies, that everything would be destroyed after the trial ended. They lied. Someone kept the samples. Someone used them without your consent. Serafina's voice was gentle. I'm sorry, I know this isn't what you signed up for. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. This woman he barely knew, this stranger carrying his child. What do you want to do? Serafina met his eyes. I want to destroy the people who did this, all of them. I want Damon in prison. I want the medical division shut down. I want every person responsible held accountable. And the baby? She placed her hand on her belly. This child deserves to know the truth. Not the scandal, not the headlines. The truth about how they came into the world and what it cost to protect them. Elias nodded slowly. Then we finish this. Together. Not as victim and rescuer, not as CEO and consultant, as parents protecting their child. Serafina felt something break open in her chest. Relief. Gratitude. The first real partnership she'd had since this nightmare began. Constance is getting a federal warrant. We'll seize the lab servers before Damon can destroy them. Once we have that evidence, the rest falls into place. When tomorrow? Maybe the day after. She's working on it now. Elias stood. I should go. Callie's staying with a neighbor. I need to get back to her. Serafina walked him to the door. Thank you. For not running. For not making this harder than it already is. He turned in the doorway. That's my child you're carrying. I don't run. After he left, Serafina sat alone in her apartment. The enormity of what lay ahead pressed down on her. Tomorrow they would start dismantling a billion-dollar conspiracy. They would expose corruption that reached into the highest levels of Stratton Industries. They would fight people with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. And at the end of it all, if they survived, they would have to figure out how to raise a child together. Two strangers bound by medical fraud and corporate violence. She thought about Elias's face when she told him about the baby. The shock, the anger, the moment when he decided to stay and fight. She thought about his daughter, about the family they'd have to build from the wreckage of this conspiracy. And she thought about the elevator, about the smoke and the fear, and Elias's voice cutting through the darkness. Stay with me, you're going to be fine. She was going to hold him to that promise. The federal courthouse on Spring Street was a brutalist monument to government authority. Gray concrete, narrow windows, the kind of building designed to intimidate anyone who entered seeking justice. Constance Lee walked through the security checkpoint at 8 a.m. carrying a briefcase that contained 40 pages of documentation, medical records, maintenance logs, security footage. The accumulated evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate Seattle. The prosecutor's office was on the 4th floor. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen specialized in bioethics violations. He'd built his career prosecuting pharmaceutical companies and medical research firms that crossed the line from innovation to exploitation. Constance laid out the case methodically, started with the elevator malfunction, showed how the safety bypass had been authorized by the CFO, explained the surge generator installed by Marcus Del Rey. Then she revealed the medical fraud, the retained genetic samples, the unauthorized IVF procedures, the baby conceived without Elias Turner's knowledge or consent. Chen listened without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is massive. If we can prove systematic retention and use of genetic material, we're looking at RICO charges, criminal conspiracy, multiple counts of medical fraud. Can you get the warrant? Chen studied the documentation. I can get it, but execution needs to be immediate. The moment Stratton's legal team catches wind of this, they'll purge every server in the building. How soon? Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Federal agents at the lab before anyone arrives for work. Constance nodded. My client needs protection. The people behind this have already attempted murder. They'll escalate when they realize we're moving. Chen made a note. I'll coordinate with FBI. They can provide security for your client and her consultant. Not just them. Turner has a 7-year-old daughter. She needs protection too. Chen's expression hardened. They threatened a child. Not directly, but they've been surveilling Turner's apartment. His daughter lives there. I'll make sure the detail includes her. Constance left the courthouse with the confirmation she needed. The warrant would be issued by end of day. Execution at dawn. She called Serafina from the parking garage. It's happening. Tomorrow morning. Keep your schedule normal today. Don't tip anyone off that we're moving. What about Elias? Tell him to take his daughter somewhere safe tonight. A hotel, a friend's house, anywhere but his apartment. Serafina was in her office when the call came. She'd spent the morning in meetings maintaining the facade of normalcy while her mind spun through contingencies. After hanging up with Constance, she texted Elias. Tonight, take Callie somewhere safe. The warrant executes tomorrow morning. His response was immediate. Understood. The rest of the day crawled. Serafina attended a merger planning session, reviewed quarterly projections, smiled and nodded while Damon presented financial forecasts that assumed the medical division would remain intact. He had no idea the floor was about to collapse beneath him. At 3 p.m., her assistant knocked on the door. A delivery had arrived. Personal. Required signature. Serafina signed for a small package. No return address. Plain brown paper. She waited until Jennifer left before opening it. Inside was a USB drive and a printed note. 3 words in block capitals. Watch this alone. Her hands went cold. She locked her office door, drew the blinds, plugged the drive into her laptop. The video file was timestamped from that morning. 9:45 a.m. The footage showed a school playground. Children running, climbing, playing tag. The camera zoomed in on one girl. Dark curls, 7 years old. Callie Turner. She was on the swings pumping her legs, laughing at something another child said. The video played for 30 seconds, then cut to black. Text appeared on the screen. Beautiful daughter. Would be terrible if something happened. Serafina's vision blurred. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Called Elias. He answered on the first ring. They sent me a video of Callie at school this morning. Elias's voice went flat. I'm getting her now. Wait, if you pull her out early, they'll know we're reacting. We need to act normal until tonight. Serafina heard him breathing, heard the effort it took to control his panic. I'll have Ronnie pick her up at regular dismissal. Take her straight to his place. I'll meet them there. Send me the address. I'll have FBI protection in place within the hour. After the call ended, Serafina forwarded the video to Constance and Chen, included a message. They're threatening the child. We need protection now, not tomorrow. Chen's response came within minutes. Agents dispatched. They'll be at the school before dismissal. Plain clothes. Turner's daughter won't know they're there. Serafina stared at the frozen image of Callie on the swing, this little girl who'd sung a lullaby for her unborn sibling, this child who had no idea her father's genetic material had been stolen, who had no idea she was about to gain a half-brother through the most twisted circumstances imaginable. The fury that rose in Serafina's chest was cold and absolute. They'd crossed a line. Threatening a pregnant woman was one thing. Threatening a child was something else entirely. She opened a new document, started drafting her statement for the board. The one she'd deliver after the warrant was executed. The one that would end Damon's career and dismantle the conspiracy he'd built. Across the city, Elias sat in his car outside Callie's school. It was 2:40, dismissal in 20 minutes. He'd called Ronnie from the office, explained the situation in careful terms. Someone was watching his apartment. He needed Callie to stay somewhere safe for a few nights. Ronnie hadn't asked questions, just gave his address and said he'd pick her up. Now Elias watched the school entrance and tried to control the rage burning through his system. They'd filmed his daughter, sent the footage as a threat, made it clear they could get to her whenever they wanted. He thought about Elena, about the promises he'd made at her funeral, to protect Callie, to keep her safe. He was failing. A black sedan pulled into the parking lot, government plates, 2 people inside. The passenger scanned the area with practiced efficiency. FBI. Elias's phone buzz, text from an unknown number. Agent Morrison, FBI. We have eyes on the school. Your daughter will be safe. He typed back. Thank you. At 3 o'clock, children poured from the building. Callie emerged with her backpack chatting with friends. She spotted Ronnie's truck and ran over, climbing into the passenger seat with the easy trust of a child who'd known him for years. The black sedan followed at a discreet distance as the truck pulled away. Elias waited until they were gone before starting his car. He drove to his apartment, packed bags for himself and Callie, grabbed the stuffed rabbit from her bed. The photo of Elena from the wall. As he was leaving, he noticed something. The apartment had been searched, carefully, professionally, but he knew his space too well. The kitchen drawer was slightly open, the closet door not quite closed, papers on his desk in a different order. They'd been inside, while he was at work, while Callie was at school, looking for what evidence that he and Serafina were investigating, proof of their alliance. He checked his laptop, still there, password protected. They wouldn't have been able to access it without specialized equipment. He grabbed it anyway, added it to the bag. At Ronnie's apartment in Georgetown, Callie was eating cookies and watching cartoons. She looked up when Elias arrived. "Are we having a sleepover?" He knelt beside her, forced a smile. "Yeah, for a few days." "That okay?" She nodded, asked if she could bring her rabbit, already packed. Outside, the black sedan remained parked across the street. Agent Morrison made eye contact with Elias through the window, a subtle nod. "We're here. We're watching." Elias spent the evening with Callie. They played board games, made dinner. He read her stories until she fell asleep on Ronnie's couch. When she was out, he and Ronnie sat in the kitchen. Ronnie poured whiskey into 2 glasses. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" Elias took a drink. The burn helped. People at Stratton tried to kill the CEO. Now they're coming after anyone who knows about it. Ronnie absorbed this. "You're one of the people who knows." "Yeah, and the CEO, she's helping me prove it." Ronnie refilled their glasses. "You always did have a talent for finding trouble." Elias almost smiled. This time trouble found me. They drank in silence. Outside, the sedan's silhouette was visible against the streetlights. Around midnight, Elias's phone buzzed. Message from Serafina. "Can't sleep. Thinking about tomorrow." He typed back, "Me too." Her response came quickly. "I keep seeing that video. Your daughter on the swing. They're monsters." Elias stared at the screen, then wrote, "Tomorrow we end them." At 6 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up outside Stratton Medical Research Laboratory in South Lake Union. The facility was separate from the main headquarters, a low brick building that handled the company's biomedical contracts. Federal agents emerged wearing windbreakers marked FBI. They carried boxes of evidence bags and laptop cases for digital seizure. Michael Chen presented the warrant to the security guard. The man's eyes widened as he read it. "I need to call my supervisor." Chen's voice was steel. "You need to unlock the doors, now. This is a federal warrant. Obstruction will result in arrest." The guard unlocked the doors. The agents moved through the facility with practiced efficiency. They secured the server room first, disconnected the network cables, prevented any remote wipe attempts. Then they began collecting physical evidence. Files, hard drives, research logs, donor consent forms. The lab director arrived at 6:30. Dr. Philip Hastings, mid-50s, flustered and angry. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just walk in here and seize private medical records." Chen handed him a copy of the warrant. "We can and we are. You're being investigated for violations of federal bioethics regulations." "I suggest you cooperate." Hastings read the warrant. His face went pale. "I want my lawyer. You're entitled to one. But this facility remains under federal control until our investigation concludes." By 8 a.m., the seizure was complete. 6 servers, 40 boxes of documents, every piece of evidence related to the donor tissue study and subsequent IVF procedures. Chen called Constance from the scene. "We got everything. Server techs are already pulling the data. Should have preliminary analysis by this afternoon." Any resistance, the director lawyered up immediately, but he looked scared. "I think he knew this was coming." "Good. Fear makes people talk." At Stratton Industries headquarters, Damon Crosswell arrived at his office at 8:15. His assistant was waiting with her tablet. "Mr. Crosswell, there's been a situation at the medical lab. Federal agents executed a search warrant this morning." Damon's expression didn't change. "What kind of warrant?" "Something about bioethics violations. The director called looking for legal support." Damon walked into his office, closed the door, sat at his desk and stared at the city through his window. They'd moved faster than he'd anticipated. The CEO and her janitor had put the pieces together, had convinced federal prosecutors to act. He'd underestimated her, assumed her fear would keep her quiet, assumed the threat to the pregnancy would be enough. He'd been wrong. Now the servers were in federal custody, the evidence of what they'd done. The retained samples, the unauthorized procedures, the systematic exploitation of hundreds of research participants. His phone buzzed, a call from the company's general counsel. "Damon, we need to talk. The FBI just seized our medical research facility." He answered calmly. "I'm aware. What's the exposure? That depends on what's in those servers. If they find evidence of the donor sample retention, we're looking at criminal charges. Multiple violations of federal medical ethics regulations. Who authorized the retention? Silence on the other end. Then, the authorization came through your office. 3 years ago, a budget memo about maximizing research assets. Damon felt the walls closing in. That memo was about equipment and supplies, not genetic material. The legal counsel's voice was careful. That's not how it reads. The language is ambiguous. A prosecutor could argue it covered biological samples. Damon ended the call, opened his laptop, started searching for the memo in question. He found it buried in his sent folder. Dated March 2022, a routine communication to the research division about extending the useful life of study materials. He'd written it carelessly, using broad language to give the lab flexibility, never imagining they'd interpret it as authorization to keep human genetic material. Or had he? He thought back to that meeting. The lab director explaining that destroying the samples seemed wasteful, that they might be useful for future research, that storing them cost almost nothing. Damon had approved, signed the memo, moved on to other matters. Now that decision was about to destroy everything. He pulled up his personal encrypted messages, sent a text to Marcus Delray. "Burn the phone we used. Delete all communications. If anyone asked, we never spoke." No response came. Damon tried calling. The number was disconnected. Delray had already run. Smart man. Damon considered his options. He could stay and fight, claim ignorance, blame the lab director for exceeding his authority, or he could follow Delray's example, disappear before the walls caved in. He looked around his office. The awards on the wall, the view he'd fought for, the corner suite that marked him as one of the most powerful executives in corporate Seattle. Walking away meant losing all of it. Staying meant prison. The choice wasn't difficult. At 10 a.m., Serafina received a call from Chen. "We found something. Multiple cases of unauthorized sample use. Turner isn't the only victim. How many? At least 15, maybe more. The records are incomplete. Some were deliberately deleted. Can you recover them? Our techs are working on it. But what we have is enough." This was systematic. Planned. Someone high up authorized the retention and knew the samples were being used. Who? The authorization memo came from the CFO's office. Crosswell's signature. Serafina closed her eyes, felt vindication and fury in equal measure. "That's our smoking gun." Yes, but there's more. The medical division was billing insurance companies for these IVF procedures, claiming they were using purchased donor material when they were actually using stolen samples. That's fraud, insurance fraud, Medicare fraud. The criminal liability here is enormous. "When do we move?" Chen paused. "I need to coordinate with the U.S. attorney. This is bigger than a local case now. We're looking at federal racketeering charges. How long? 48 hours. Maybe less. Keep this quiet until we have the indictments ready." Serafina hung up, looked at the photo on her desk, the company's executive team, Damon standing beside her diamond watch visible. In 48 hours, he'd be in handcuffs. She called Elias, told him what Chen had found. There are others, 15 people whose genetic material was stolen and used without consent. Elias was quiet. Then, "We need to find them. Tell them what happened. Give them a choice about whether to come forward." Serafina thought about that. 15 families, 15 children conceived through fraud. The scandal would be massive. Chen's working on identifying them from the lab records. "Once we have names, we can reach out. Carefully. These people don't know yet. Finding out your child was conceived this way, it'll destroy some of them." Serafina touched her belly, felt the baby move. It almost destroyed us, but we're still standing because we had each other, because we chose to fight together. Not everyone will have that. Elias was right. Some of these families would fracture under the weight of the truth. Some marriages would end. Some parents would reject children they'd once loved. But the truth had to come out anyway. At Ronnie's apartment, Callie was getting restless. She'd been cooped up for 2 days, kept asking when they could go home. Elias distracted her with puzzles and games. But he could see her patience wearing thin. That afternoon, he took her to a park in Georgetown. The FBI agents followed in their sedan, parked where they could maintain line of sight. Callie ran toward the playground. Elias sat on a bench and watched her climb the jungle gym. His phone buzzed. Message from Constance. Need you at my office. 4 p.m. Bring any documentation you have from the tissue study. He texted back. What's happening? Building the civil case. The victims will want to sue. We need to start organizing. Elias thought about those 15 other families. Other men who'd donated samples for research. Other women who'd undergone IVF thinking they were using legitimate donors. Other children like the ones Serafina carried. He watched Callie slide down and run back to the jungle gym. Thought about how she'd react when she learned the truth. When she discovered she had a half-sibling conceived through medical fraud. Would she understand? Would she accept it? Or would she feel betrayed that he'd kept the secret? At 4 p.m., Elias sat in Constance's office in a high-rise near Pike Place Market. The attorney spread documents across her conference table. These are the consent forms you signed for the tissue study. See this language here? She pointed to a paragraph in small print. All donated materials will be destroyed within 90 days of study completion. No exceptions. They violated the agreement. Constance nodded, which makes this not just medical fraud, but breach of contract. You have standing to sue Stratton Industries, the medical lab, and every person involved in the retention decision. What about the other victims? I'm drafting a class action framework. Once we have their identities, we can reach out, offer representation. Some of them won't want to sue, won't want the publicity. Constance met his eyes. That's their choice, but they deserve to know what was done to them. Elias thought about Serafina, about how she'd reacted when Dr. Penn told her the truth. The shock, the betrayal, the anger. Some people would direct that anger at the children, at the innocent lives created from the fraud. How do we protect the kids in all this? Constance's expression softened. We can't, not completely, but we can control the narrative. Frame it as institutional failure rather than individual shame. Make it clear these children are victims, not mistakes. Elias looked at the consent forms. His signature at the bottom, the promise that his genetic material would be destroyed, a promise broken by people who saw human tissue as corporate assets. I want them all held accountable. Not just Damon, everyone who knew and stayed silent. That's what we're building toward. At Stratton Industries, Damon's assistant knocked on his door at 5 p.m. Mr. Crosswell, the board has requested your presence at an emergency meeting. 6 o'clock, conference room A. Damon knew what this was. The general counsel had briefed the board. They were preparing to distance themselves from the scandal. He considered refusing, walking out, leaving the building and never coming back. But that would look like guilt, like flight. He needed to control the narrative, present himself as a victim of overzealous prosecutors and disloyal subordinates. At 6 p.m., he entered the conference room. The entire board was present. Serafina sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Damon took his seat, folded his hands on the table. The board chair, Gerald Morrison, spoke first. Damon, I'm sure you're aware the FBI executed a warrant at our medical research facility. They've seized servers containing evidence of what they're calling systematic bioethics violations. I'm aware. Can you explain why authorization for sample retention came from your office? Damon kept his voice steady. That memo was about general research assets. The lab director exceeded his authority in applying it to biological materials. Morrison glanced at the general counsel. The lawyer slid a document across the table. This is the memo in question. The language is broad enough to include biological samples. Damon read it, saw how it could be interpreted. That wasn't my intent. Intent is difficult to prove. What matters is the outcome. And the outcome is that 15 families were defrauded. Federal prosecutors are building a criminal case. Damon looked at Serafina. She met his gaze without flinching. She'd won. She'd built a case strong enough to destroy him. The board chair continued. We need to discuss your position with the company. Given the severity of these allegations, the board feels it's appropriate to place you on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Damon's jaw tightened. I've given this company 12 years, built the financial systems that enabled our growth. And you're going to hang me out to dry based on a prosecutor's interpretation of an ambiguous memo. We're protecting the company. If you're charged criminally, your presence here becomes a liability. Serafina spoke for the first time. This isn't just about the memo. We have evidence you authorized the elevator bypass that nearly killed me. The room went silent. Damon looked at her, saw the steel in her eyes. That's absurd. I approved routine maintenance delays, nothing more. She pulled out her phone, played the CCTV footage. Damon standing outside the elevator, checking his watch, walking away. You knew about the malfunction before it happened. You stood there and waited for me to get trapped. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Morrison's face had gone pale. Damon forced himself to remain calm. I was waiting for an elevator. The footage proves nothing. It proves you were present. It establishes timeline. Combined with the maintenance records and Marcus Del Rey's testimony, it builds a case. Del Rey won't testify. He's disappeared. Serafina smiled. Cold. Actually, he turned himself in this morning. Offered full cooperation in exchange for immunity. He's already given a statement implicating you. Damon felt the floor drop away. Del Rey had flipped. The electrician had decided saving himself was more important than protecting the conspiracy. Everything was unraveling. Morrison stood. Damon, I'm going to ask you to leave. Security will escort you from the building. You'll receive formal notice of your suspension tomorrow. Damon looked around the table. These people he'd worked with for over a decade. These colleagues who'd benefited from his financial strategies and budget optimizations. Not one of them met his eyes. He stood, straightened his jacket, walked to the door with as much dignity as he could muster. Outside, 2 security guards waited. They didn't speak, just flanked him as he walked to his office. He had 10 minutes to collect personal items. They watched while he packed a box, made sure he didn't access any computers. The walk through the building was a parade of shame. Executives pretended not to notice. Assistants turned away. At the lobby, the guards took his ACOS badge, his parking pass, his company credit card. He stepped onto the sidewalk carrying a cardboard box, just like Elias Turner 3 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. A black sedan was parked at the curb. FBI agents stepped out. Damon Crosswell, we have questions about your involvement in medical fraud and attempted murder. You're not under arrest, but we'd like you to come with us voluntarily. Damon set down the box, looked at the building rising above him. Then he said the only smart thing he had said all day. I want a lawyer. The FBI field office on 3rd Avenue was designed for intimidation. Concrete walls. Fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Interview rooms with one-way mirrors and recording equipment visible in the corners. Damon Crosswell sat across from Agent Morrison and Michael Chen. His lawyer, Richard Vance from Preston Gates, sat beside him reviewing notes on a yellow legal pad. Chen opened a folder, placed photographs on the table one by one. Marcus Del Rey entering the substation. The surge generator attached to the distribution panel. Serafina unconscious in the elevator. The fetal heart monitor showing distress. Del Rey gave us everything. The phone calls, the payment, the specific instructions on where to install the device. Vance interrupted. My client hasn't been charged with anything. This is a voluntary interview. Unless you're prepared to file charges, we're leaving. Chen smiled. We're prepared. We're just being courteous by giving Mr. Crosswell a chance to cooperate before the indictment drops. Damon leaned back. His diamond watch caught the harsh light. I have nothing to say. Chen pulled out another document, the authorization memo for sample retention. This is your signature, your email, your authorization for the medical lab to retain biological materials from research participants. That memo was misinterpreted. 15 families were defrauded. 15 children conceived using stolen genetic material. All because someone at the top gave permission. You can't prove I knew how the lab would use those samples. Chen placed another photo. Elias Turner's consent form from the tissue study, the clause promising destruction of all materials within 90 days. Mr. Turner trusted your company, donated genetic material for legitimate research. 3 years later, that material was used to conceive a child without his knowledge. A child being carried by the CEO you tried to murder. Vance stood. We're done here. Charge my client or let him go. Chen nodded to Agent Morrison. The agent pulled out handcuffs. Damon Crosswell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Damon's face went blank as the cuffs closed around his wrists. The diamond watch pressed against cold steel. Vance began protesting, demanding bail, threatening appeals, but Damon knew it was over. The evidence was overwhelming. Delray's testimony would bury him. The electronic trail would show coordination between the elevator malfunction and the medical fraud. They walked him out through the parking garage, away from cameras, away from the press that would soon descend. At the federal detention center, they processed him. Fingerprints, mugshot, orange jumpsuit. The CFO of Stratton Industries became inmate 47382. Across town at Ronnie's apartment, Elias was making dinner when his phone rang. Constance Lee. They arrested Damon an hour ago. Chen said the arraignment is tomorrow morning. They're asking for no bail given flight risk. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. It's really over. The criminal case is just starting. But yes, he's in custody. He can't hurt you or Serafina anymore. Elias looked at Callie watching cartoons on the couch. Safe, protected, unaware how close they'd come to disaster. When can we go home? Give it another day. Let the FBI confirm there are no other threats. Then you can return to normal life. Normal. Elias almost laughed. Nothing about his life would be normal again. He was about to become a father to a child he'd never planned, about to be connected forever to a woman he barely knew, about to watch his genetic theft become national news. After dinner, he sat with Callie and tried to explain. Something happened at work, something big. People did bad things and now they're in trouble. Callie looked up from her puzzle. What kind of bad things? They hurt people? Lied, tried to cover it up. Did they hurt you? Elias thought about the termination, the surveillance, the threat implied in that video. They tried, but we stopped them. Who's we? Me and Miss Serafina, the woman I told you about, the one who's having a baby. Callie's face brightened. The baby I sang for? Yeah, that baby. When can I meet them? Elias felt his throat tighten. Soon. Real soon. At her penthouse, Serafina stood at the window watching the sun set over Elliott Bay. Her phone had been ringing all evening. Board members, investors, press contacts. She'd ignored them all. Tomorrow would bring chaos. The arrest would go public. The medical fraud scandal would explode. Every news outlet would be calling. But tonight, she just wanted silence. Her hand rested on her belly. The baby was active, kicking, pressing against her ribs. She thought about Elias, about the conversation they'd need to have soon, not about the case or the conspiracy, about the child, about custody and parenting, and how two strangers built a family from wreckage. Her phone buzzed. Text from Dr. Penn. Need to see you tomorrow if possible. Baby's measuring large. Want to discuss delivery timeline. Serafina's heart jumped. She was only 32 weeks. Too early, she typed back. How early are we talking? Dr. Penn's response was immediate. Let's discuss in person. 10 a.m. Serafina confirmed, then called Constance. My doctor wants to move up the delivery timeline. If something happens, if I go into labor during the trial, we need contingencies. Constance was quiet for a moment. The trial won't start for months. Damon's lawyers will drag it out as long as possible. What if I deliver before then we make sure you're recovered before you testify. The case doesn't depend solely on you, but it'll be stronger with me. Yes, but your health comes first. The baby's health comes first. Serafina looked at her reflection in the darkening window. She looked exhausted, pale. The stress was taking its toll. I can't slow down. Not yet. We're too close. You need to rest. Doctor's orders. My orders. Everyone's orders, except your own. Serafina almost smiled. I'll rest when Damon's in prison. He's already in jail. You won. Not until the verdict. Not until every person involved is held accountable. After hanging up, Serafina opened her laptop, started drafting her testimony, the words she'd speak in court, the truth she'd tell under oath. She worked until midnight, then fell into bed without changing clothes. She dreamed of the elevator, but this time when the doors opened, instead of Elias, there was no one. Just smoke and darkness and the monitor beeping its irregular rhythm. She woke at 3 a.m. gasping, hand on her belly, counting kicks until her heart rate settled. The next morning, Damon's arraignment was a media circus. News trucks lined the street outside the courthouse. Reporters jostled for position. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Serafina sat in the gallery beside Constance. Elias was 2 rows back. They'd agreed not to sit together, not to give the press an easy photo of the CEO and the janitor united. Damon shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front, his hair uncombed. The diamond watch was gone. He looked diminished, like a predator removed from his habitat. The judge read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, racketeering, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice. 15 counts total. Vance argued for bail. His client was a pillar of the community. No prior criminal record. Deep ties to Seattle. Chen countered. Extensive financial resources. Access to offshore accounts. Flight risk was extreme. The judge barely deliberated. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to federal custody pending trial. Damon's face remained blank. But Serafina saw the moment reality settled over him. He was going to die in prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Serafina had prepared a statement. She stood at the microphone, Constance beside her. Today marks the beginning of justice for 15 families whose trust was violated, for research participants whose genetic material was stolen, for children conceived through fraud who deserve better than the circumstances of their creation. A reporter shouted a question. Ms. Caldwell, is it true you're one of those 15 families? Serafina didn't flinch. I am. My child was conceived using genetic material taken without consent from a Stratton employee. When I discovered this, I could have stayed silent, could have protected the company's reputation. Instead, I chose truth. Another reporter. Who is the biological father? That's private. What matters is that he and I are working together to ensure this never happens to another family. More questions, more cameras. Serafina answered what she could and deflected the rest. Across the crowd, she caught Elias's eye. He gave a subtle nod. Support without drawing attention. When the press conference ended, Constance guided her to a waiting car. You did well. Controlled the narrative. Made it about justice instead of scandal. Serafina felt drained. How long until trial? 6 months minimum. Vance will file every motion he can think of. Delays, change of venue, dismiss for lack of evidence. Will any of them work? No. The evidence is too strong, but he'll try anyway. At 10 a.m., Serafina met Dr. Penn at the medical office. The ultrasound showed a baby measuring ahead of schedule, estimated weight already over 5 pounds. Dr. Penn's expression was serious. Your blood pressure is elevated. Stress levels are dangerous. The baby's size combined with your risk factors makes me want to consider early delivery. How early? 36 weeks. Maybe sooner if your blood pressure doesn't stabilize. That's a month from now. Serafina tried to calculate. The trial wouldn't even have a start date by then. I need more time. Dr. Penn shook her head. You need to prioritize this baby's health. And your own. Preeclampsia is a real risk. If your pressure keeps climbing, we might not have a choice. Serafina left the appointment shaken. She'd been so focused on the case, on justice, on destroying Damon's defense. She hadn't considered that her body might make decisions for her arm. That afternoon, she met Elias at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Neutral ground, away from Stratton Industries and prying eyes. He arrived with 2 coffees, set one in front of her. Decaf. I checked. She smiled despite herself. Getting the hang of this. He sat across from her. They'd seen each other in court but hadn't spoken privately since the arrest. How are you holding up? Serafina wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Doctor says the baby might come early, in a month, maybe sooner. Elias's eyes widened. Is everything okay? She's healthy. I'm healthy. Just stressed. Blood pressure issues. You need to slow down. That's what everyone keeps saying. Maybe everyone's right. Serafina met his gaze. I can't stop now, not when we're this close. You won't be any use to anyone if you end up in the hospital. She knew he was right, but the momentum carried her forward. The need to see this through, to stand in that courtroom and watch Damon's conviction. We need to talk about after, about the baby. Elias nodded. I've been thinking about that. And I want to be part of their life, not just biologically, actually present, involved. Serafina felt relief wash over her. Good, because I don't think I can do this alone. You won't have to. We'll figure it out. Custody, parenting, all of it. What about Callie? Elias's expression softened. She's excited to be a big sister, doesn't fully understand the situation yet, but she's ready to love this baby. Serafina thought about the lullaby, the voicemail, the little girl who'd sung for her unborn sibling. I'd like to meet her. Properly. Not in crisis. She'd like that too. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people whose lives had collided in the most unlikely way, who'd been forced into partnership by corporate violence, who were now choosing to build something real from the ashes. Elias spoke carefully. This isn't how I imagined becoming a father again. But that doesn't make it less real. Serafina touched her belly. This isn't how I imagined any of this. But here we are. Here we are. 2 weeks later, Constance called with news. The other 14 families had been identified. FBI agents were making contact, explaining what had happened, offering resources and legal representation. How are they reacting? Mixed. Some are devastated, some are angry, a few are in denial. Any willing to join the class action? 6 so far, the others need time. Serafina understood. Learning your child was conceived through fraud. That the donor you'd trusted was actually stolen material. That your entire family was built on lies. It would break some people. What about criminal charges? For the lab director, Dr. Hastings is cooperating, blaming Damon for everything. Says he was just following orders. Classic defense. Chen doesn't believe him. The records show Hastings knew exactly what he was doing. He'll face charges too. Good. Serafina was reviewing the updated case files when Jennifer knocked on her door. Ms. Caldwell, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Who? She wouldn't give her name, but she said it's about Elias Turner. Serafina's blood went cold. Send her in. The woman who entered was in her 60s, well-dressed, nervous hands clutching a purse. I'm Margaret Turner, Elias's mother-in-law. Elena's mother. Serafina stood, offered her hand. Please, sit. Margaret sat stiffly, looked around the office like she'd wandered into foreign territory. I've been following the news. About the case, about what happened to my son-in-law. Serafina waited. Elena told me before she died, made me promise to watch over Elias and Callie, to make sure they were okay. Margaret's voice cracked. I failed. I moved to Arizona, left them alone. And now this. You didn't fail. Elias is strong. He's protecting his daughter. He's doing the right thing. Margaret met her eyes. Is it true what they're saying, that the baby you're carrying is his? Serafina hesitated, then nodded. It is, but not by choice, not by either of us. Our genetic material was used without consent. Margaret absorbed this. Elena would have wanted you to know. She made me promise to tell you if something like this ever happened. Tell me what Elena knew about the tissue study. Elias donated samples when she was pregnant with Callie. They were trying to save money for the birth. The study paid $300. Serafina felt ice spread through her chest. She was there when he signed the consent forms. She read them carefully, made sure it was legitimate. Margaret's hands trembled. Before she died, she told me she was worried, that she'd had dreams about those samples, about them being used for something terrible. Elena asked me to watch for news about Stratton Industries, to make sure Elias wasn't being exploited. Serafina's throat tightened. I'm sorry I didn't do more. I should have checked on them. You're here now. That's what matters. Margaret stood. I want to help. With the baby. With Callie. With whatever you need. Serafina felt tears burning behind her eyes. Thank you. After Margaret left, Serafina sat alone in her office. Elena's warning echoing through her mind. A woman who died 3 years ago had somehow known. Had felt something was wrong. Had tried to protect her family from beyond the grave. That evening, Serafina called Elias. Told him about Margaret's visit. She was there. When you signed in the consent forms, Elias was quiet. I'd forgotten. Everything from that time is blurry. Elena was sick. We were scared. $300 meant we could afford the hospital bills. She was trying to protect you. She always did. They talked until late about Elena, about grief, about the impossible task of building a new family while honoring the one that had been lost. At 35 weeks, Serafina's blood pressure spiked during a routine checkup. Dr. Penn admitted her to Swedish hospital for monitoring. Elias arrived within the hour, brought magazines and snacks, sat beside her bed while monitors beeped. You don't have to stay. I want to. They watched television without really seeing it, played cards, talked about everything except the case. At midnight, a contraction hit. Mild but unmistakable. Dr. Penn was called. She examined Serafina and frowned. You're dilating, slowly, but it's happening. It's too early. 35 weeks is viable. If labor progresses, we won't stop it. Serafina looked at Elias, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. Call Constance. Tell her it's happening. Elias made the call, then texted Ronnie to bring Callie to the hospital. By 3 a.m. contractions were regular, 5 minutes apart. Dr. Penn prepped for delivery. Callie arrived with Ronnie and Margaret. The little girl's eyes were wide. Is the baby coming? Serafina managed a smile. Yeah, soon. Callie climbed onto the chair beside the bed, took Serafina's hand. It's okay to be scared. My dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you do it anyway. Serafina squeezed her hand. Your dad's a smart man. Elias stood on the other side of the bed, one hand on Serafina's shoulder, one on Callie's. This makeshift family, this impossible unit forged in crisis. At 6:18 a.m., after 3 hours of labor, their son was born. 5 pounds, 7 ounces. Healthy lungs, strong heartbeat. Dr. Penn placed him in Serafina's arms. Elias leaned close. Callie stood on tiptoe to see. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching. Callie whispered, Hi, baby. I'm your sister. Serafina looked at Elias, saw tears tracking down his face. What should we name him, Elias thought for a moment. Miles, after your father, and Noah, after Elena's father. Miles Noah. Serafina tested the name, felt it settle into place. Perfect. 3 months later, the trial began. Damon's lawyers had exhausted their delays. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible. Marcus Del Rey testified first. Described the phone calls, the cash payment, the installation of the surge generator. Dr. Hastings followed, broke down under Chen's questioning, admitted he'd known the sample retention was illegal, had done it anyway because Damon promised career advancement. Serafina took the stand on day 4, told the jury about the elevator, about discovering the fraud, about the genetic theft that had created her son. She looked directly at Damon while she spoke. He stared back without expression. Elias testified the next day, showed his consent forms, explained how he'd trusted Stratton Industries to destroy his genetic material, described learning he'd become a father without knowing, without choosing. The jury watched in silence. When both sides rested, deliberations took 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Damon showed no reaction, just stood while the judge scheduled sentencing. Outside the courthouse, Serafina and Elias gave a joint press conference. Miles was 3 months old, sleeping in a carrier against Serafina's chest. Callie stood beside her father. Today justice was served. But this was never about vengeance. It was about protecting families, about ensuring no one else suffers what we suffered. A reporter asked about the baby. We're raising him together, not as a couple, as partners, as parents who choose truth over convenience. What's next? Serafina smiled. We've established the Turner Ethics Foundation, dedicated to protecting donor rights, ensuring informed consent in medical research, making sure what happened to us never happens again, Elias added. And we're working with legislators to strengthen medical ethics laws, to create real penalties for genetic theft. The press conference ended. They walked to Serafina's car together. A family, unconventional, born from tragedy, but real. 6 months after the trial, Damon Crosswell was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The judge cited the severity of his crimes, the breach of trust, the endangerment of innocent lives. Stratton Industries settled the class action for $250 million. The medical division was permanently shut down. The board was restructured, new oversight protocols implemented. Serafina remained CEO, stronger than before, respected for her courage. Elias became the foundation's director of safety engineering, working to reform medical research practices across the country. On Miles's first birthday, they held a celebration at Green Lake Park, the same place where they'd first planned their investigation. Callie pushed her brother on the baby swings. Margaret helped with cake. Ronnie and Mrs. Alvarez laughed at some shared joke. Elias stood beside Serafina watching their families merge. Think we made it? Serafina leaned against his shoulder. Yeah, we made it, not the family either of them had imagined, not the story they would have chosen, but theirs, built on truth, forged in fire, held together by the simple decision to show up, to fight, to protect the ones who mattered. And in the end, that was enough.